welcome back to the final video on the Art in Action YouTube channel. It's very surreal to think that in just 2 weeks, Tara and I are going to be back in St. Andrews meeting with the other RNA scholars to discuss what they've been working on and just to share our experiences. So a big thank you to everyone who's been following along on our journey across this whole year. It really means a lot to us. So anyway, as you might have gathered from the videos I've been posting on our YouTube and our Instagram, Vermont is a state that prides itself on being very open to people of all cultures and all walks of life. But at the same time, according to the 2022 census, about 95% of Vermont's population is white. Asian residents make up about 2.1% of Vermont's population. Black and African American residents make up about 1.5%, and then Indigenous people make up only 0.4% of the population. So the fact that Vermont is so predominantly Caucasian made me wonder, what is it like to be a person of color in Vermont? How do you retain a sense of your cultural identity and your heritage? How do you build a community with people of the same ethnicity? For this video, I decided to focus on the part of Vermont that I'm the most familiar with and the area where I went to high school, which is the Upper Valley. And the Upper Valley is essentially a collection of towns on the border of Vermont and New Hampshire along the Connecticut River. It's a very idyllic middle to upper middle class area that is home to academic institutions like Dartmouth College, as well as the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which definitely creates a very kind of cerebral academic atmosphere and also just generates a lot of wealth. I ended up interviewing my friends Yen, Eunice, and Mindy about their experience being Asian American in the Upper Valley. And they're all second generation immigrants who have grown up in some of the main towns in the Upper Valley, Norwich, Hanover, and Lebanon. They're all close in age range, but not so close to have crossed over in middle school or high school. And they're also all really creative people. So I was curious to see how they've explored their heritage and their identity through their artwork. I really appreciate that they all took the time to talk with me, and I'm excited to share some of what we talked about. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So we started off all the interviews talking about what it was like to go to school in the Upper Valley. In like elementary school and high school, like were there other Asian kids around, or were you kind of like, I'm on my own here?
I think it was basically on my own.
Okay.
It was like one other, maybe like two more Asian kids growing up, but it's not like I had specifically sought out to be friends with them. One, they lived way outside the main hub of Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Two, they were boys, and my parents didn't want me hanging out with boys.
Since Norwich is so small, that also meant there wasn't like too much diversity. I would always find myself like the only Asian kid in an all-white class, and that was always the case in my 6 years at Marion Cross. I would say like, even though I was so young, I was very much aware that I looked different from everyone else.
While Eunice found that being the only Asian kid in her class made her feel like she stood out, Mindy said that her experience actually had the opposite effect on her.
I think growing up, I honestly didn't really think about it that much. I think when you're a kid and you're put in an environment, you don't really question it. Like, you don't have the tools of like an adult brain to really like analyze or think about the environment that you're growing up in, or like the social environment that you're put in. Just almost felt normal for me to like really analyze what everyone else was doing and like their social mannerisms, and I just thought that was like a part of growing up. So it's kind of like weird actually, because I feel like I didn't really even think about the fact that I was like Asian and like didn't look like other people, or I don't know. I guess like it's nuanced, but I almost like just thought I was white until like a certain age, because I don't know, you don't really gain like a self-perception or like a deep self-perception until a certain age. So up until then, it was just like, oh, my parents are like having me do all the things that all the other kids are doing, like that everything just like feels normal, I guess.
So beyond talking about going to school, I was curious to hear what Mindy, Eunice, and Yen had to say about finding an Asian community in the Upper Valley and if they'd found the UV to be a very accepting place or not.
I don't think it really exists. Like, I don't think I've found it here.
It's funny, I've lived here for about at least 25 years of my life. I didn't really start exploring more of the local community until the last 4 years.
Like of Leb in general, or specifically?
In Leb in general.
Okay.
And I think it was just because my parents had kept to themselves for so long, with there being a lack of an Asian community around here, that they thought it was best for them. And I'm sure it's because, I think partially it's because, like, they couldn't, it was a mix of fear of reaching out to new people, as it is with being a new immigrant in a completely new country.
Yeah.
I think also when my dad came in the 80s, there was a lot of racial tensions that are still, like, in his mindset today. Kind of a shame, because I think I think my dad would, like, really like visiting the garden center, for example. You've seen my house. It's full of plants.
It's a big garden.
It is a big garden with a lot of trees. And I think he would have benefited from meeting more people who are also crazy into plants like he is.
Yeah. In my interview with Mindy, she suggested that the lack of openness to Asian residents might have to do with New England's culture as a whole.
So it's not just like, oh, people act this way towards like minorities or like certain racial groups. I think people in New England have this culture of like being so deeply New England. Like, a lot of people have stayed here for generations, and there's like such a deep like camaraderie around being a New Englander that it's very hard to break into that, even just as anyone like moving from anywhere else. If you have like a language barrier, or if you don't like speak perfect English, even my friends who I've talked to from high school who are like white, but their parents were immigrants from white countries, still feel a little bit out of place. And so it's like, for that to feel like, oh, you're not a part of the culture as much, is like, yeah, this culture is like pretty exclusive. But at the same time, like, I feel like there's a really beautiful part of that culture where it's like, once you are part of the community, it's like, these are like your lifelong people. Like, it's so it's like a really strong community.
So because Asian residents are so vastly outnumbered in Vermont and in the Upper Valley more specifically, traditions that are specific to a certain country or a certain culture often end up getting watered down because there aren't enough people to participate.
There wasn't enough Asians, more specifically Koreans, for me to find a community with, because East Asian countries are all so different.
Stuff like Lunar New Year, we didn't shy away from that. Lunar New Year, we celebrate it's like a death anniversary of our grandparents. So we set up a banquet table and we put like food out for them, and we eat as if they're here with us. But those are very internal cultural stuff. It wasn't really anything, like, we didn't hang stuff in our house for the Lunar New Year or anything.
Okay.
Not because it was a risk of being racially targeted, but because it's wintertime up here. And no one wants to go outside in the cold February, January winter storm and try to set up like streamers and lights and stuff. I did kind of feel a little sadly disconnected. I remember one New Year's we did get to go down to Boston to attend the Chinatown Lunar New Year, but specifically within the Vietnamese Cultural Center or something like that. And I remember feeling sad and being like, wow, I've missed out on this my whole life.
Like just those traditions?
Yeah, okay. Just like being able to gather and hang out with those people. And I think my parents are starting to, not that they have more time with my dad being retired and all, they're being like, we kind of miss our people and we want to hang out with them more. So they've been able to go down to Boston, and they want to visit some friends who recently moved from Boston to Florida to see what it's like down there.
Not only does the lack of Asian communities in the Upper Valley make it hard to come together for holidays and other traditions outside of your family, but when communities are formed, a sense of scarcity in a predominantly white area can breed competition rather than camaraderie and solidarity.
When I was younger, I remember there's a Chinese church community My family used to go, like, I don't really remember a lot of it, but my family used to go, and it was like sort of a couple scattered Asian families in the Upper Valley, but sorry, specifically Chinese families in the Upper Valley. But it wasn't like, my family was never religious. I don't think this church community was extremely religious either. It was more just like a community space. But even then, I think my family stopped going because there was just like there was a sort of culture in this church community space that was very like comparative with like people's kids and like very competitive. I think a lot of times in communities where there is like so few of a minority, or like just so few of like a certain like group of person, there's that scarcity mindset of, then it's like, you know, the same families are like competing for the same things, or there was just like a very competitive sense in the community, so my family stopped going.
Although it may be harder to practice cultural traditions outside of your individual family, the Upper Valley has become home to a lot of Asian cuisine, as Yen pointed out in her interview.
There were always school events like international potluck, so bring your Vietnamese cuisine, bring your Ethiopian cuisine, bring your Chinese like traditional dishes to this big event every year. So I would say that's a good sign that the Upper Valley has still been progressive, and I think it's become more progressive over the years, which is awesome. Especially with I told you about the Super Asian store down there. There's also the various Thai restaurants and other Southeast Asian restaurants.
So many Thai restaurants in
there. Yeah, it's really funny. I don't know how
it's like
here
4
ended up being the Thai place. I'm not complaining, but I would like a Vietnamese restaurant. I would like some pho around here. Peking Tokyo has been around for a while too, but it's always been the sense that it's an Americanized Chinese food restaurant. It's not until recent years that I feel like we're finally getting some more, I say, authentic cultural cuisine.
So when I talked to Eunice, she said something similar, referencing the Japanese-Korean fusion restaurant in Hanover called Sushiya, which her mom used to work at. She told me that the restaurant isn't able to serve that much traditional Korean or Japanese food, like seaweed soup or raw crab, as she referenced, because for the Caucasian Upper Valley palate, those traditional meals are just too foreign and wouldn't bring in enough business. I was curious to see if Mindy and Yen's sense of identity or relationship to their identity had changed when they went to college, or if they've been able to find more diversity while on campus, especially Yen, who went to Dartmouth in Hanover.
So I feel like Dartmouth was definitely like, whoa, there's like other people around here. Like other Vietnamese and Asian people. But I still felt a little, I found a Vietnamese student group, but I still felt a little left out because I think most of them were students from Vietnam. So they found each other and they were able to speak their language, and I was kind of just on the border, being this, I guess, like, I think the term is second-gen immigrant, who didn't have a grasp on the language, didn't have a grasp on these like funny Vietnamese puns. I guess, and they were very nice to me, but I didn't really feel connected to them, which is really sad. I probably could have tried harder to like stay in touch and be like, hey, can you guys teach me Vietnamese? But I think I just had a lot of self-consciousness and insecurity about not knowing the language as well as I should have at that age.
When I went to school in North Carolina, there was so much diversity. Like, I'd never been in a community like that diverse. I didn't realize that my whole friend group was like BIPOC until honestly like graduation, and I was like reflecting on it. So there's ASA, which is Asian Student Association at Duke, and it's just like, yeah, I guess an identity group / community. And I almost felt like I didn't really fit in with that because like I knew so little about my own heritage or like my culture, and I felt like the things that were really meaningful to me just like didn't really overlap with things that were really meaningful to people I knew in ASA.
Can you elaborate like what those things were?
Yeah, and like I think a lot of like a large community or a large group of people who were in ASA were a lot of like East Asian people who grew up in the Bay Area or like Long Island, like these places in the US where there's just a huge Asian population. Like they just like felt so confidently Asian, and they like would talk about like K-dramas. Never knew that was even a thing. And so like it's even now still feels foreign to me. Whereas like I feel like interacting with people like East Asian people from the Bay Area, they would just like talk about all these like deeply Asian things. Also granted, deeply Asian American things, which I think is different from like Asian.
Point. Yeah.
But it's almost like the Asian Americans have created their own like Asian American culture, which I had not interacted with at all growing up. So I was just like honestly kind of intimidated. I was like, you are so confidently Asian and just like talking about all these Asian things like it's nothing. Whereas like I would feel like embarrassed to talk about this. If I were to talk about like what I had for dinner, or like my favorite food that my mom makes, like it's not so much that I feel like other people would make fun of it, or I don't know. I do think there's still a certain level of decor in Hanover.
Right.
But it's more just like, why would I bring it up? It's easier to talk about things that other people relate to, right? So it's like, why would I bring up something that no one understands? Almost like now subconsciously thinking about like, what can this other person connect with me? I think I code switch, and not necessarily in a bad way, but like I think I code switch a lot depending on like what social circle I'm in.
After hearing about Yen, Eunice, and Mindy's time in school, I was curious to hear how they might have explored their heritage and identities in their artwork. Yen, for example, used collage to situate herself in Vietnam's larger history as a country.
One was a final drawing exam project or whatever. It was a series of 5 self-portraits where I illustrated 5 periods in Vietnam's historical timeline, or pre-colonial, colonial era, right before Vietnam War, during Vietnam War, post-war, and then like modern era. So I used brown paper to like as the base of my clothes, and I drew myself and stuff, and then I Googled various stock images to cut out and like paste onto the clothes and patterns and stuff. The final piece, which was the modern era, or immigrants who had fled to the United States or wherever else, actually those were all family photos. So photos of myself, photos of my sisters, my cousins, so that it showed that I was basically coming from a long history of like all this stuff, and that it was just me sharing history with people from the eyes of a Vietnamese person or a Vietnamese American person, not just like basically saying there's more to Vietnam than just the Vietnam War.
While Yen's work focused on placing herself in the larger timeline of Vietnam's history, Eunice told me about a piece she made in high school that weaves together her identities as Korean and American. She captured a view of her hometown in Norwich in traditional Korean ink, with her English name on one side and her Korean name in Old Chinese on the other side, capturing both parts of her identity in a single work, meeting at the focal point of her hometown. And then finally, Mindy told me about how she used photography to capture the outdoor activities of the BIPOC snow sports organization she's part of out in Portland, where she lives.
I enjoy taking photos of people having fun doing the things they love. So that's what I've really loved, like actually about like being part of Trail Mix and like Open Slopes PDX, which is a BIPOC queer snow sport nonprofit. I love like being involved with these communities and taking photos for a lot of their events, because it allows me to like portray people of all sorts of different identities doing these things. It's sort of like helping create that representation in media, because if no one's taking photos, what do you share on Instagram? Or like not to make everything about social media, but like that is one of the big platforms of media that people see. So yeah, I think it means a lot to me to be able to like use that craft and like use those skills that like are honestly kind of rare to find like in these communities, and you know, offer up my time to like increase this representation.
So to finish the interview, I asked everyone what they would change if they could wave a magic wand and create their perfect Upper Valley. Mindy gave a very simple answer, explaining that between home, school, and now where she lives in Portland, she's developed so many different social circles, and she wished they could all just converge in one place. Or as she put it,
I just want all my beans in one can, you know?
Eunice talked about simply wanting there to be more of a BIPOC presence in the Upper Valley.
The people in the Upper Valley are already so kind and so accepting. The only thing I'd like to see is just like some more diversity. So I know they're gonna be accepted.
Right.
And so it'd be cool to see people learn about other new cultures.
And then lastly, Yen talked about the need to address the gentrification in the Upper Valley. That if we want more independent and BIPOC businesses and families to move to the area, something needs to change. And what Yen's referencing is that in the past couple of years, the cost of living in the Upper Valley has continued to skyrocket, and it has increasingly pushed families farther and farther from these local hubs. Throughout the pandemic and after, a lot of independent businesses have had to close, and there's also been a lack of affordable housing being built. So the Upper Valley is kind of at this point where it's becoming increasingly inaccessible for families to live unless you're in that upper middle class echelon.
Seeing how badly COVID has like struck businesses around here and how expensive leases getting for businesses, if you could just stop heading towards gentrification and like letting all these funny quirky little stores exist without having to worry about making a lot of profit to help cover the bills, that would be awesome. Because I think better diversity and cultural awareness and stuff like that just comes when people are not like desperate, I guess. Like they have more time to do things they want to do, like expand their mind, educate themselves, and have more time to like head to events where they meet all sorts of people. More affordable event means more people can actually live here.
That's a great point. Yeah, instead of commuting in. Yeah, that's a great point. Because how do you feel with Leb? Like we were just saying, it's kind of the place to be right now, but do you worry that it's heading towards gentrification and it will push residents out, or what do you think about that?
I love all these stores are opening up and it's so wonderful, but I do slightly worry about that because of all these new apartments that have been opening up when they could have equally been used as storefronts instead. If you've been driving around, you might have also been seeing the recent art installations. So I pointed out, I think over there is the music thing. They opened up a little like multicolored rainbow sitting cafe area between City Hall and one of the brick buildings. So it's just a nice place to hang out, like while you wait for bus or while you're eating in town. It's a lot of like cute little art projects around town that I think are really important, but I hope it's not to help disguise the fact that rent is very expensive right now.
So I've been thinking about how I wanted to wrap up this video, and I wish I had a very structured, neat and tidy conclusion with some solutions, and you know, it was all very simple. But really everything that's been discussed is just quite complicated, and I think a lot of these issues are still very fragmented in my mind and also very fresh. Something that stood out obviously to me is what Yen said, that we need to make a more affordable Upper Valley so that people are able to invest in their communities and stick around and build communities that celebrate diversity instead of watering it down. But I also think Mindy made a great point that the majority often wins, and there's not a huge incentive for people to move to a place where they can't celebrate their culture with others, and they'd probably have a much easier time of it in a city like New York or Boston, where there's a much larger Asian community. Another thing that stood out to me, Eunice, Mindy, and Yen all talked about how much they love where they're from. And like Mindy was saying, she specifically came back to Vermont for a few weeks because she missed it and she wanted to be around for a Vermont summer. So once again, I think it's really complicated. So anyway, I wish I had more conclusive thoughts, but I kind of want to just let the interviewees speak for themselves. So again, a big thank you to Mindy, Eunice, and Yen for letting me interview you guys. I really, really appreciate it. I had an amazing time. You guys slay. I'm gonna link an episode down below to the Vermont Public, which is like the big media site in Vermont. Their podcast, Brave Little State, answers all these questions that Vermonters send in to them, and they have a really good episode that actually inspired me to make this episode on Art in Action about what it's like to be Asian in Vermont more generally outside of the Upper Valley. And they have a lot of really cool interviews, a lot of really good information, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for following along this year. It means a lot. Tara and I have talked about this a little bit, but sometimes when we make stuff, it can feel a bit like we're just shouting it into the void and like not getting anything back. So every like, every subscribe, all the comments or just messages have meant so much. And yeah, I really appreciate it. I've had so much fun going on this YouTube journey the past year. And yeah, so thank you so much. I'm excited for whatever the future may hold. And yeah, okay, not emotional. I think the best way to wrap this whole thing up is with a quote from the Magic School Bus that Yen used to end her interview, and it goes like this.
Take chances, make mistakes, get messy!